Welcome everyone to the 2020 Tom Hendry Awards RBC Emerging Playwright Award Night. So my name is Mindy Doherty Griffiths and I am the Public Relations Manager at PGC. We are thrilled to have you tuning in with us this evening for our special presentation panel, What I Would Tell My Emerging Self. We would like to thank our generous sponsor, the RBC Emerging Artists Project. Playwrights Guild of Canada honors and acknowledges the territory upon which our office resides, the traditional land of the Wendat, the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Métis, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We recognize and respect all recorded and unrecorded nations who cared for this land of Takaranto, meaning where the trees are standing in water. PGC is grateful for the opportunity to protect and care for the stories of this community, which is the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. So this year the awards are a little bit different, but we're very excited to at least to be able to come together tonight on Zoom for this special panel. And it is my pleasure this evening to introduce our moderator and our host, Raul Varma. Raul is a playwright, essayist, and an activist. In 1981, he co-founded Esri Danya Theatre, which is dedicated to producing socially relevant theatre, examining issues of cultural representation and diversity in Canada. Raul became the company's artistic director in 1986. He is a member of the editorial board of Alt Theatre, Canada's only theatre quarterly dedicated to cultural diversity and the stage. He writes both in Hindi and English, which is the language of his adulthood. He made his first forays into English language with a series of one-act plays that included Job Stealer, Isolated Incident, and Equal Wages. With Land Where the Trees Talk in 1989, he turned his attention to the creation of full-length plays. His full-length works include No Man's Land, Trading Injuries, Counter-Offense, and Beaupas. His most recent plays are Truth and Treason and State of Denial. And without further ado, I will hand this over to Raul.
Thank you. So thank you very much, everyone, you and the fellow panelists. And it's totally an honor for me to moderate this very distinguished panel, which is so great and so creative. And the fact that I was talking to them a few minutes ago, I'm just feeling rather relaxed here. So we'll must proceed. We have with us today Hiro Kanagawa. Hiro is a Vancouver-based actor and writer. His distinction includes Jesse Richardson Award for both acting and writing, an Asian on Film Award, and numerous other nominations. Although Hiro is best known as an actor, he was a story editor on several critically acclaimed Canadian television series: Da Vinci's Inquest, Da Vinci's City Hall, Intelligence, and Backstone, to say few. His play Tiger of Malaya and the Patron Saint of Stanley Park and numerous other short works have been performed all across Canada. His most recent play, Indian Arm, received 2017 Governor General Literary Award. Hiro, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Next, I have Catherine Banks. Catherine's plays have been performed all across Canada, Scotland, US, and Catalonia, and include Miss and Me, It Is Solved by Walking, Bone Cage, 3 Stories, Ocean View, and Bitter Rose, which aired on Bravo Canada. Bone Cage premiered in 2007 and went on to win the Governor General Literary Award for drama. It Is Solved by Walking also won the Governor General Literary Award and was translated into Catalan and was one of the 3 Canadian plays that toured to Catalonia. Catherine has adapted Ernest Buckler's novel, The Mountain and the Valley, for the stage. Her play, Downheart, is set to premiere in 2021, and she's working on a new play, King of Days. I believe Catherine just announced in the time before that it has 13 actors. Is that right, Catherine?
A Mountain and the Valley does, yes.
Okay.
It does.
Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
And then finally, we have Anne-Marie Woods, also known as Amani, is an award-winning multidisciplinary artist, art educator, producer, playwright, poet, director, and creative consultant. With roots in London, England, Trinidad, and spending her formative days in Nova Scotia, her life and career has always challenged boundaries and blended multiple genres or styles. In 2001, her play Waiting to Explode was presented at the National Black Theatre Festival in North Carolina. She was voted as one of the 100 Black women in Canada to watch for, and she won the Harry Jerome Award for Excellence in Entertainment. In 2016, her theatrical rhapsody on Black Love, She Said, He Said, was produced by Black Theatre Workshop in Montreal, which also premiered her youth production, Scotian Journey. Anne-Marie, welcome.
Hi.
So now with that introduction, I'm going to move to the subject or panel discussion, which is what would I tell my emerging self? And by so doing so, I want to say something about the playwrights and the fact that the word emerging has been associated with our names. Now, I need to brag about the playwrights first and foremost. My playwrights are very important in our industry because if the playwrights did not write, then directors will have nothing to direct, designers will have nothing to design, and actors will have no characters to play. So they're very important for our industry. And yet a playwright goes through a certain journey. And the first step in the journey is when the playwrights are seeking recognition, mere recognition, and are in the birth fangs of their career. And it is a time, we call it emerging playwrights, it is a time when they lay down the foundation of who they will become when they have emerged out from the emerging phase and become established playwright, as our distinguished panel is today. That said, I want to direct my first question to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, you know that we are under pandemic, under COVID-19 lockdown. And this pandemic, on the one hand, has locked us down, prohibited us from seeing each other. But on the other hand, it has also revealed something hiding under the society for the longest time. All those basic contradictions in our society, poverty, the systemic racism, inequality, exclusion, war, displacement, what have you. Now, this is not a nice thing to say, but for the playwrights, it's wonderful when they begin to identify that there are so many contradictions existing. This is just a material for them to write. Now, given that situation that has existed in the past, and given that it has been exposed at the present time, beyond any doubt, Anne-Marie, I'm going to ask you, in other words, not much has changed, and I'm going to ask you in that context, what would you tell your emerging self when you first started writing? Consider situation hasn't changed. It has given you all the contradictions that you may have dreamed for.
I think I would tell my emerging self and myself today the same type of thing, which is number one, try not to ever compare myself to other people. I think it's hard when we're in this business. I know for me too, especially as a woman of color, woman of African descent, it's sometimes more difficult to get our stories out there, or people might not even understand the way that we write. But I would say, don't compare yourself, keep going, and also don't get discouraged, because it's very easy to do, I think, in this business as well. And especially in a pandemic, it's like we're saying, the world is different, but it's still the same, because I think for many artists, myself included, I'm somewhat reclusive, though people may not know that as a writer. So the way the world is now is not very different to how I live, except for that I need a mask when I go to the grocery store now. But also try to find ways to stay encouraged when life or world events are coming at you. And that's been something I would say during this time for me, with the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and all the things that were happening on the news. It was very difficult for me. And it's taken me, I'm literally, I would say, just coming back to life, just being able to write again and do those things in the last few weeks. So this panel comes at a very good time. But again, stay encouraged, and also believe in your work more than other people might believe in it. Because once you start submitting your plays, I know for me, the other year I applied for 5 grants. I didn't get any of them. I had to produce my play on my own, but the play was still well received by the audience that was there. So it's kind of those things, stay encouraged, believe in your work, don't compare yourself to other people, though that might seem difficult, and just everybody has their own style of writing and creating, and that's okay. So.
Wonderful. This is great. This is a great start to stay encouraged, stay focused, believe in yourself. Some time ago, I was listening to this conversation from director Ravi Jain of the Why Not Theatre. A question was posed to him that, what he would have liked to become. And he said the question was that, given the system, what he could have done 13 years ago when he started the things. Mm-hmm. And he went through some hard time, but he persisted. He remained focused, and he's one of the very established directors. So thank you very much for that, Anne-Marie. I'm going to ask the same thing to Catherine. Catherine, what would you do? I mean, you have a very impressive body of work. You've translated into many languages, and you have adopted the books. Very impressive body of, so under these circumstances, Catherine, what would you tell your emerging self now that you have so well emerged?
Well, I think the first thing that I would caution myself on is to, I had very lofty goals. I had ideas of what success would mean, and I still haven't hit those things. Even though I have, a body of, 8 or more plays, I still, I haven't had a play on at the National Arts Center or even on the Neptune main stage. So it's, and I think that I tortured myself for years and perhaps didn't celebrate what I did achieve because I still was measuring myself against this, what I thought would be successful. I think the other thing that I would tell myself is, I read in an application recently that a woman had been told by her mentor, you've chosen a rocky road. You have to learn to love the rocks. And I now at this age, when I get a rejection and I haven't had successful grant applications and I get, rejections from theaters, is that I go back and I look at the play and I think, okay, so what is this next bit of time going to allow me to do with this play? And almost always the play grows. And so that's what I mean by embracing, a rejection, is to say, okay, how can I make this play better for the next time I'll send it out? So those are a couple things. And also I was very tenderhearted. I always took rejection personally. And I wish so much I hadn't, because I tortured myself. And now I see that it isn't a personal thing at all. It has to do with, what they're looking for and their cast and their season. But I always took it, oh, they hate my work. They hate my work. So.
Obviously not. I mean, your work is excellent. And I think that I conclude that caution is what you are recommending. This is wonderful. But you see, in the theater, we are very unlike novelists, and we are very unlike poets who can sit in the confine of their drawing rooms and do their creation. Just the painters could do the same, but we as a playwright depend on a community. depend on the producers, depend on the venue, depend on a social infrastructure. So the relativity is part of our vocation.
That's right.
And it will sometimes happens. I still believe that there is a disconnect, a very strong disconnect between what the playwright creates and how artistic directors across the country with tremendous amount of power, majority of them white male, how much control they have on us. So take it as a challenge. It's not a reflection on your work. It's reflection on where the power has been invested. It needs to change. So thank you very much, Catherine, for your wonderful answer. Hero, I was saving you for the last to answer the same question. Hero, you are muted.
Yes, here we go. I'm in a condo here in Winnipeg. The internet connection seems to be unstable. So bear with me if I freeze or anything. But the question is what I learned, what I would tell my emerging self now about my younger.
When you started, yes. What would you
like as Catherine was,
when you started?
I think that when I started, I had an idea of who I was going to be as a writer and what I was going to write. And I realize now that just as when we write plays, the plays get created through a long process of constant revision, and they create themselves through a process. In the same way, I feel that we have to create ourselves as writers, and that is a long process of constantly becoming something. And I think as a younger person, I had an idea of who I wanted to be. I had an idea of what I wanted to write. And, that you can't force that. That's something that needs to be discovered over time through a process. So, and so now I'm a much happier individual because I'm not full of angst trying to be something or live up to an idea that's just in my head. I'm just happy to be working and discovering and being on that process of constantly finding out who I am and what it is that I want to be writing about.
So you're going to tell yourself that you're going to grow with your play and you're going to grow with your journey as you move from one play to the next, to the next, to the next. Am I summing you up right?
You just have to discover you discover the road as you're walking it. I think that's as in life, I think that's the only way you can journey through. That's what I've learned anyways. That's what works for me.
Wonderful. Anne-Marie, I'm going to come back to you again. Then what are you going to tell when you learned what you learned from your very first production?
Okay, so I'm trying to think how to answer this. So my first production, so to speak, would have been when I created theater out of anger. So a lot of times my work came from not being included. And so the first performance or type of play I had was in the Fringe Festival in Nova Scotia. And I wasn't being promoted at all, and my show was completely selling out. I was tying with a guy from the States who had a play called Freaks. This was in the 90s. And so during that time, I had to tell myself I had to go and really fight for, why isn't my name here? My play is selling out. So in that case, I learned that a lot of times I have to fight for my voice. Later on, I'd say in 2001, I got a one-woman show that was in a theater festival in the States. And I learned with that production that the technical person for your show can ruin your show, especially if you're in another country. I'm meticulous about having the notes and the sound cues, everything. And so if it were my younger self, I would say, again, you have to fight a lot of times for your work, for the things you want. You have to fight for the respect. I had to challenge the technician. I had to take people with me because I was a bit afraid. I was a bit younger then, but I still always was like, you have to fight for your work. Then in 2016 was the first time I had a production in an equity theater. So Quincy Amaror, the artistic director of Black Theater Workshop, produced She Said, He Said. And in that case, what was great is that I fully trusted him because his vision was very much like the vision that I had for my work. And through that process, that was the first time for me leaving Toronto, going to Montreal, sitting in a theater and actually seeing my work on an equity stage. So it was definitely a thrill of a lifetime for me as a playwright to have this, and to sit in the audience and experience it was, it's like you're kind of removed from the experience. So it was very surreal. And then it's also interesting how somebody else can also, even though you might have similarities, how they can interpret your work, or you learn how actors can interpret your writing completely differently from what your original intention was. And with that production too, you learn compromise. You learn about the art of revision. I don't know how many times I had to rewrite scenes, and Quincy kept telling me to change the way that I tell stories, because coming from a one-woman show type of background, I'm used to just explaining everything, and he's like, you don't have to do that. Show us. So for me, it was a great experience, one, working with a Black artistic director, seeing my work interpreted in a different way, and then learning how theaters put on a show and all of the things that go behind it, and really how actors can change even with how they might articulate text that you wrote, that can completely change the meaning of what you intended. So those are some of the things I learned.
Well, this is very interesting, very, very interesting, because you had the experience in the Fringe, almost self-produced, yep. And then Quincy, who is a great friend of mine, he invests in the work, and you produced in your culture, in your thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that the play keeps growing. So I think that there is a saying among our playwriting community that the play is never finished.
Oh, exactly. Exactly.
And I think that I think that various people have different interpretation of the scenario, but I think the actors are very important for us because we write words, they give it a voice.
Right. I also wanted to say to emerging playwrights or people that are listening that you have to learn patience, because the work does evolve. There are many revisions. Yeah. That play that was on stage in 2016 originally started as a monologue in 2007. So those are things I think for playwrights coming into this business as well, to understand that sometimes the story takes years and may have many different versions of that same story.
Amazing. Catherine, you can enlighten us with this question. I think that your body of work, as I said, is very diverse, multinational, has traveled. What would you say, what you learned from your first production? that we can all benefit from?
Well, with my first production, it was a very small company here in Halifax, and they were doing their, I believe it was their second season, and they had lost a lot of money. They were their mandate was to produce local work, but they were also doing interesting work from the States. So they kind of tried to do three plays a season. And so mine was the Canadian work, the Atlantic Canadian work. Well, they did painted churches with Tina Howe in September, and nobody went to it. And they lost lots and lots of money. So they had to choose one or two, only one of the next two plays. So my play and the other play, I forget which one it was now, but it wasn't a local work. And they chose the other play. And so the Summer of the Piping Plover was chopped. And I'm not a very assertive person, but I fought for that play, just like Anne-Marie said. Like I phoned the chairman of the board. I wrote letters. I explained what it meant to me to have a first production of an equity production, and the board chairman took up my cause, and they chose my play. So I really learned that I had to speak up for my work in order for it to get done. That was the big takeaway from that production.
So you created the work, you marketed the work, and you struggled for it.
Yes, absolutely. And also I totally agree with Anne-Marie. That's the other thing. I have, young playwrights in my playwriting classes, and I always tell them my plays take 5, 7, 10 years to write. And that's just how long it takes. Unfortunately, that is not the granting system, but it is how long it, so somebody say, oh, you get 20,000 to write a play. Well, spread over 10 years. That's not a great deal of money, but plays take a really long time, because I think you grow, as Hiro said, you grow through the process of writing. And sometimes you're not there yet. You're just, you're in your own psyche. You're not there close enough to finishing the play until you've processed it a really long time. So it's just one of those things. It takes a long time.
So Hiro, you've been quoted by Catherine. So I'm going to come back to you with the same question. What did you learn from your first production? What would you tell yourself you learned from your first production, Hiro?
What I learned from my first production is that you cannot control how the audience and critics are going to respond. It's someone once said that the history of theater is the history of opening nights, right? And that opening night production is actually not a good representation of what your play might ultimately be. Yeah. The opening night of my first professional production at Factory Theater coincided with Game 7 of the Yankees Red Sox in 2003, I believe it was. At any rate, it was a huge deal. No one wanted to be in the theater. And, at intermission, all anyone was talking about was the game, because it was close. And I think it was before the Red Sox had actually, started to win anything. So, people didn't want to be in the theater, including some of the cast. And, everyone was just hoping the play would be over before the game so that they could catch the end of the game. And the play actually did very poorly in Toronto. It got very poor reviews. And then, not even a month later, just 3 weeks later, 2.5 weeks later, the absolute same production went to the National Arts Center because it was a co-pro, and they loved it in Ottawa. They loved it, and the newspapers and the media in Ottawa loved it. And I had no control over any of that. So that was a huge lesson. I was obviously quite crushed by the response in Toronto, but you know, a few weeks later, I learned a good lesson.
The response in Toronto from who? From the media, from the public?
Well, both. I think it started with the media reaction because it was generally fairly poor. You know, people didn't want to come see it, so it didn't get good houses at all. But then, you know, things turned right around when it went to Ottawa.
Well, I think that before I move into the next question, I think that there is a follow-up question here, and particularly to the media. I think that you said something very interesting at the beginning, that the play is the opening night. A media has come after much persuasion. The play opens late in the night, around 8 o'clock, finishes by 10 o'clock, and in a span of 24 hours, the reviewer has to file the report. There is no guarantee how serious work he would do. As a playwright has invested, Catherine just said that she takes 5-7 years to write a play. In general, even the playwrights who can write faster may have spent 1 or 2 years. And here comes a reviewer, sees it for 90 minutes, gives himself a pause of 24 hours and writes whatever. And that is what connects us to the public that has not seen the play and has read about it. And there is a tremendous amount of power invested in believing that what reviewer is saying, in fact, might be true. I think there is a need for us to revise that system. Maybe reviewer must be given a script in advance. Maybe he should study the text separately from its presentation, so he can see what's the bridging there is. But it is absolutely essential, given such a low publicity budget and the marketing budget we have, that reviewer does a good work, because he or she is our link to the public that has not seen the play. But them rushing into it, controlling our life, us quoting them all the time, a bit disbalancing. And I do believe that there is a disparity between what reviewer says and what public says. Our best judge is public. And yet they can say it to the only in circle and not beyond that. I do not know how to solve this problem of tremendous amount of control that reviewers have on the lives of the playwrights, really. Okay, so Anne-Marie, I'm going to come back to you again. And so I think that my first half of my question is always going to be the same. What would you tell your emerging self?
Okay.
The later half will change. That in the process, if you get stuck, Anne-Marie, you get stuck by whatever cause, by systemic difficulties, as you have mentioned, by the fact that I don't know what I'm going to write about, even though I do want to write about, or I have decided to write about, and I'm stuck, or I have a writer's block, or what. What did you get stuck with in one or two or many of your plays? How did you resolve it? What are you going to tell us in general, what we could do when we do get stuck?
Okay, so about getting stuck. Okay, I'll tell definitely with my play Scotian Journey, which is a youth production that BTW also produced. What happened there was I wrote that script quite a while ago, and then it was going to get into the theater. And then the time frame of when the theater needed the script and what I could possibly do definitely didn't coincide. So in that situation, I just had to be firm to say, it will be impossible for me to do this in this time. I needed the headspace because I find sometimes it is harder when demands are on you to write. Like some people can just, I can do poetry like that, but with plays, it's not the same. So in that situation, I actually went on a vacation. I went on a vacation and I used that time. Like I was in Turks and Caicos, it was my birthday treat. And I actually used that time to do the writing that I wasn't able to do the month before, and to actually work on revising the script and getting that into the theater. And for emerging playwrights, or for my emerging self, I think I'm the same now as I was younger, where I'm not afraid to stand up for myself or to say I need more time. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that, to say, to kind of put their foot down or say what they need. But it's very important because it's your work and you're sending that out there. More recently, the situation for me was more personal, where I lost my father during the pandemic, and writing for me is my escape. And as I mentioned, with the world, the murder of George Floyd, with all of the things that were happening on the news, we were really zoomed in, pardon the pun, on what was happening on world events. And then also dealing with a loss, I found like I was grieving for myself, I was grieving for my people, and I could not write for about 5 or 6 months. Like I literally just, like this panel and my writing have all come about at the same time. So I do have this new play called Why Black Women Whisper, because it is an all spoken word. It is definitely, it's interesting trying to tackle monologue and dialogue and then making it all poetic, making it all spoken word or rhyme. But I was unable to write at all. April, May, June, July, like literally until about 2 weeks ago. And what I said to myself at that time was, this is who I am right now. I'm grieving. This is what I have to go through. I didn't try to write every day. I didn't force myself. I didn't push myself. And then finally, at a time when I felt better and the grieving was better, and I learned to turn off the news, I was able to write. And also with that same play, and I really like to speak to the playwrights that are listening tonight as well. Years ago when I started writing that, it just came to me, I say, from a higher power. It's these 5 women, these voices. It's not something I necessarily planned to write, but my USB key broke and I lost all of the work. And I started writing it in 2017, and all I could remember was a bit of the song. And then in 2018, again, when I was away, there's a theme here. I was back home in Trinidad and as in Tobago, and I just woke up one morning and all of a sudden I could remember the song. I could remember the characters, and I just started writing. So for that period of time, I was stuck for about a year, but I just, again, had to say to myself, do not stress over it. These characters will come to you again. You've lost your work. You kind of remember the song, so use that as your base. So I think the theme for me is always, don't be hard on yourself. And I'm an actor and a poet as well. We can be very emotional. I think we are super hard on ourselves anyway, the nature of the business, the nature of who we are. And that's something we have to do, is like, forgive ourselves. Like, it's okay if you can't do something at this time. It's okay if you had a deadline and you have to extend it or ask for it to be extended.
You negotiated yourself out of the stuck.
Exactly.
Catherine, there is so much you can tell us on this question, really, because I guarantee that you may have gotten stuck on more things and you may have found more solutions for us. It'll be nice to hear from you.
Well, I have gotten stuck a number of times. I found when I had a busy life with 2 young children, I could think a lot about writing and then know what I was going to write. But as soon as my children were less demanding, I got kind of felt almost lazy, like I couldn't get to the page as organized as I had always been before. So it was a changing process. But the characters that I have are so alive to me. They always pull me back in. So I've come to trust that if I have a period of time when I can't write, that it will happen. Just like Anne-Marie says, it will come because it must. They're inside, they're pushing. I can remember, this is a story I've told before, but I remember when I was writing Bone Cage, there was a period of a year when my family was going through something quite traumatic, and I just couldn't get to the page. I could never get to the page. But when I thought of Jamie, the main character, he was by the river having a cigarette, like he was waiting for me. And then one day I thought of him and he wasn't by the river. And I walked up on top of the bridge in my mind and I looked in both directions and I saw him driving away. And I thought, if I don't start writing, I've lost him. Like, he's lost his patience with me. So, you know, they're inside, they want you to tell their story. So I just trust that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Keep thinking about it. But if you can't get to the page, don't, as Anne-Marie says, don't be hard on yourself. Let yourself breathe, because there must be something you're processing that will help you in the long run.
You can definitely tell us more about it.
Well, that's just kind of, I mean, that's how I work. Like, I don't give myself exercises. I read a lot of poetry and I walk. Those are the other two things. If I'm stuck on a scene, I go for a walk, a really long walk. I take a pencil, I take a notepad, and I just walk. And sometimes I just write down one line. And I can tell you, if I write down that line, I can come back and write a scene. It is really incredible. But if I don't take the notebook and the pencil and I have that brilliant thought, so-called brilliant thought, when I get back, I never can remember it. And I go for really long walks. So that's why I have a play, It Is Solved by Walking, because literally it is solved by walking.
Doing mental exercise, essentially.
Yes, yeah. Piling wood, anything that, you know, is just road, mowing lawns, anything that's road, and your mind can just be free and you can just lightly think of the play, like your mind just sort of skims over the top of the scene, and then you start to go a bit deeper.
So this is very interesting that both you and Anne-Marie are very generous with your answers, unlike Hero, who is an editor also, and he gives the short answers. Hero, I'm going to ask you the same question, but don't remain into, I know that you edit films and you edited the shows and you cut down 6 pages into 6 lines, but give us a generous answer.
Well, you know, I should write a play that's called It Is Solved by Sleeping. Much of my career as a writer has corresponded with my children being very young. My son is 14 and my daughter is 12. So, you know, they were quite small when I was writing doing a lot of the plays that I'm known for. And I had to learn to be very efficient with my time. So I do not ever stare at a blank screen anymore, waiting for inspiration, as I used to do when I was younger. I pretty much need to have it figured out in my head before I sit down to write. I just don't find it useful. You know, it's just not an efficient use of my time. I just don't have the time to sit around, you know, waiting for inspiration. So in that sense, I don't have a routine. I don't, you know, force myself to write however many words a day or however many pages a day, or I don't force myself to sit for however many hours a day writing, being stuck, because it's just, I don't have time for that in my life. I have kids and, you know, I have things to do, grocery shopping, and I gotta cook meals and etc. So I try and figure it out in my head before I sit down to write. Now, if I do get stuck, I will say this, it's usually because I'm in the way. My ego and my rational conscious mind wants the play to go in a certain direction, or wants the character to do something or say something. And that's what is leading me to be stuck. And I'm not joking when I say it is solved by sleeping, because often if I have a problem, I just go to sleep, and 3:30, 4 in the morning, I'll wake up. My ego and my conscious mind have gone to sleep, have gone away, and my subconscious usually solves the problem. And I keep a pad and pen next to my bed, and I'll wake up in the wee hours of the morning with the problem solved. I'll just scroll it all down. And in the morning, you know, I'll transcribe all of that. And sometimes it'll be several pages. And that'll be my writing for the day. And a lot of the time it's gold. I don't have to make any revisions to it or anything. It's a kind of a gift, but I don't understand it as being a gift from a supernatural force or anything. It's just my conscious mind and my stupid ego getting out of the way and allowing the creativity to flow out, you know, and I go to sleep. That's how it's solved.
So you are pre-inspired by itself. This sitting by a screen doesn't inspire you.
No.
You manage your time so well.
I have to.
And you self-analyze yourself. And in order to do that, you take a distance and then rejoin. What a wonderful advice. Thank you very much, Ciro. Thanks God, this time you did speak relatively more and you gave us a lot more wisdom. Thank you. I do not know how are we doing time-wise. I believe we have, what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
So what we're going to do now is we're just going to open up the chat and see if there are any questions from everyone who's been listening in today. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat.
I will say I agree with Hiro that he has that early morning, just when I wake up, is pure gold. That is the juice of the day. It's a beautiful, beautiful time to write. And I often write for about an hour and a half in that time, just after waking.
It's amazing.
It is an amazing period of time to write. You're just very connected, I think.
I have heard that your mind is at its best 4 hours in the early part of the day, early morning.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the first question we have here, was there an event or time in your life when you felt most inspired to write?
Who wants to talk about it?
I think it was one of my first serious aspirations in life, was to be a writer of some kind. So I always had that desire, and as many people do, I think. And you know, you have to, the rest of it is you have to learn the perseverance to stick with it, and I think that's really what I'm a writer, only because I learned to persevere and have that perseverance match my original desire to write, which in the beginning I didn't know how to do or what I wanted to say, really. I just knew I wanted to write.
Anne-Marie?
Oh my goodness. I think as a youth, my brother David Woods is also a writer, and he started dragging me to things where I got to see people that look like me performing theater. So that was inspirational. And he also introduced me to the book For Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Ntozake Shange. And when I first saw that, it was at a small theater in Halifax. I was just like, I want to create something like that one day. I want to be able to write that type of theater. So those were, and then Janet Sears, her play, Harlem Duet, I was in years ago at Neptune, but her play Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God, for me, is also, so I'm often inspired by other playwrights or other writers or things that I see, and seeing the success of others or hearing the words of other people. Those are what inspire me to, like, okay, I want to write, I want to create something like that, or just, yeah.
Amazing. Catherine, you want to add your voice to this?
I think that I've always wanted to write about the lives of women, particularly in rural Nova Scotia. And so a lot of my stories are inspired by that. And I feel a real push to, my father had 5 sisters and 5 aunts, and my grandmother, and they grew up in poverty and so on. And I wanted to write a lot about their stories. So I would say that is the times I've felt most, you know, like this huge big push, but every play pushes you. You notice something, it might be something that you noticed 5 years before, and then suddenly it comes forward because of something somebody says, and then you just suddenly you have to write about it. So I would say every play pushes me to express something, to ask a question and try to figure it out.
Well, I think I'm supposed to be sitting here in order to sort of navigate this discussion, but I want to give an answer to this question myself from my position as a moderator. I think there is a general aspect to inspiration, and there is a specific aspect to the inspiration. General aspect to the inspiration is that why does one write? And I think in my particular case, it was an absence of literature, playwriting literature representing people of color. I mean, I am in this country now by almost more than 40 years. And when I started, I mean, I could literally see no example of a population other than white population. So there was nothing about them. And I think that the bookshelves of our country had to be non-monochromatic. So idea of writing about the marginalized people was my general inspiration. So to begin to write about what has been marginalized by the mainstream, instead of writing what mainstream was writing itself. And a specific aspect of that was, as I said, that every play that we have written has been triggered by something, in my case, by watching an image, but particularly by watching people. So that was individual inspiration for every individual play. Is there any other questions we have?
We have 2 more questions, and then we're going to go to the awards. So the first question is, how has the Canadian theatre scene grown, and what is it still lacking?
Oh God, one of the biggest question has been asked when Mandy has told us that we have only 8 minutes left. Okay, who wants to take that on? Hero, how about you?
I think that, you know, when I started, you know, Vancouver, for instance, when I started out, did not have the internationally and nationally and internationally renowned independent theater scene that it does now. So in that sense, it's grown. I think that the Canadian theater has grown tremendously. In terms of what it's still lacking, I would say it has a lot to do with what is still lacking in the Canadian national identity. You know, there was a time when I had spent 1/3 of my life in Japan, 1/3 in the United States, and 1/3 in Canada. And because Japan and the United States have very strong national identities, That's the one thing that I've always found lacking in Canadian culture generally. And I think that that is reflected in not only the theater, but in many other art forms in Canada. And as you were saying earlier, I think that it has a lot to do with Canada's failure to reckon with its true multicultural identity and history. And once we're able to do that, I think that Canadian theater and Canadian society and Canadian culture in general can grow, exponentially compared to where we are now.
Yeah, I do think that it has grown tremendously, and I think it has grown in diversity. It is more women-centric now, at least in terms of the content being written. Still, I know I just read the statistics just today. Rebecca Burton had written an article that only 26% of women all across the country are artistic directors, or even though the women population is, women audience are more than 50%, only 26% of them actually go to see production. The fact still is that there is more feminist writing, there is more diverse writing, there is more writing from LGBTQ community, from the indigenous community. So in that way, it has grown, and I think that it'll be in the best interest of Canada to define its national identity as more diverse than bicultural or monochromatic. That would be tremendous. And I think in that way, Canada is a sort of a microcosm of the world, and it has to take advantage of that. Anne-Marie, you want to add something to this?
Not enough time, but I just think that I have seen it in the last few years where more mainstream theaters have put on, Afrocentric productions or Black productions, and it's great, but there needs to be more, and there needs to be more voices. And as you said, like the Indigenous community, the Black community, all the different cultures, there just has to be room for theater to continue to evolve, because these voices have always been here and always had stories to tell, and the recognition is coming, but to me, there's still much further to go.
Catherine?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with, especially down here, we've been really slow, but it was interesting because Mary Vingo and I, she was the artistic director, of course, many theaters, but Eastern Front Theater. And when Linda Moore was at Neptune and Mary Vingo was at Eastern Front, there was a lot of diversity in the theater. And then we went into a period of time when it was white men in both of those positions, and it just closed down. So now it's opening up again, and the new artistic directors are much more, going to have diversity in their casting and stories. And I just think then now theater will get exciting again, really exciting for everyone.
Well, I think that this is very true. I think that identity as a gender identity, sexual identity, the cultural identity, all of that has become a factor in terms of diversifying the Canadian theater. I still believe that the identity aspect is one part of our growth, but also are our plays, despite the identity and so on and so forth, are actually addressing very meaningful social issues, very meaningful social justice issue, very meaningful power issue. That's another aspect of that, because I think that the display of the identity by itself is only half of the story. Yes, we have diversified, but it has to become more progressive. It has to become more challenging. It has to be questioning the system a lot more than it has. And I think that's so the one part of the question that what was missing. I think we have not reached to a level of progressive execution of social issues as much as we should be able to.
Okay, there's one last question here.
How are we doing time-wise?
One last question, which we'll do short answers,
Yes.
and then we'll go on to the awards.
Okay.
Could you share any tips you can share on bringing structure into a largely unstructured, self-motivated career? How do you balance the creative with the job in a successful way?
Don't sleep.
To throw another big one at you.
Anne-Marie, you have answered this question. You need
Yes,
to answer it.
Yes, to the unstructured, structured person trying to work and have their career, I completely relate to you. But it's okay if your work isn't theater doesn't have to have a construct. Like theater can be different. So that's the first thing. Like whatever it is you're thinking about the structure of how you work or how you write, try to get rid of that, even though they'll teach you about structure and the arc of the story and all those things. But, and also you have to figure that out for yourself, how you're going to devote time, if it is to playwriting and to your career. I've been self-employed most of my creative career, but recently now I am working and writing, but I'm a very structured person by nature. So like, Catherine mentioned, Hero mentioned, early in the morning is definitely my time when I would wake up and write. But each individual person has to figure this out for themselves. You have to figure out, like, for me, I write goals, I have timelines, things to do, all of that stuff. So even though plays might take years, I will have write down that, oh, like, Monday to Friday, I will work on this, or by this time in the year, I would like to submit my work. So maybe look at it that way. When you want to write, right now, Theatre Creators Reserve is open for playwrights in Ontario to submit their work to different theaters. So maybe look at deadlines that you might strive for. Maybe look at deadlines for theatre grants with Canada Council or OAC and say, oh, maybe I can't do that this year, but I can do it next year. So you really have to define your own structure. And with your work, again, just trying not to be hard on yourself. Try to do some free writing, try to be free in how you create, and then go back and add structure to the script. I hope that helps.
Hero, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I think I would tend to take an opposite view. You know, I tend to I don't look at structure as an impediment. I think that in a lot of cases, the beauty that we see in art comes from how creative you can be within a structure. For instance, my mother writes haiku poems, in something that she started to do late in life. And haiku, of course, in the West, we know as, well, you have 5 syllables, then you have 7 syllables, then you have 5 syllables. And that in itself is a fairly rigid structure. But as it's practiced in Japan, there is an entire dictionary just for haiku, because depending on the season, there are certain subjects that you must write about and certain vocabulary that you must use. And so if someone is a serious haiku artist, they have to work within insanely rigid structures and yet still try and find creativity and beauty within that structure, right? And so, you know, it's the same with writing plays or writing pop songs or anything. I mean, there is going to be a structure, and you can either resist it or you can embrace it and work with it. And certainly when I was younger, I was not interested in working within structures, but once again, my hair is gray. I've mellowed. I'm not full of angst anymore. And I find a lot of satisfaction and creativity and joy in identifying the structures that are there and working within them, I guess, you know. It makes me sound rather boring and square, but that's, you know, that's what I've learned to do, I guess. And I don't think of my plays as not being creative. I think they are creative.
Yes.
You know?
Catherine, last word from you. With such great body of work, I think that you can definitely shed light on this question.
Well, I started writing the day I brought my first child home from the hospital. Literally, I put her in a little bassinet and I sat down at my desk and I started The Summer of the Piping Plover. So what was really important to me for 10 or 12 years, I had a very important colleague who would say, how's the play coming? Let me read your scenes, you know, and she would set little deadlines or say, let's meet in 3 weeks. And she was just so important. Her name's Tessa Mendel, and she's a director. And she just, it was just important, so important. So I say, have somebody waiting, you know, because the artistic director's never going to get back to you, or he's going to get back to you in a year. So a colleague is really important. The other thing that I had on the bulletin board over my desk was the line from a poem that I'd read many years ago about a poet who came home from work too weary to write. And then he sat at his desk and he said, surely the tide comes twice a day. And that was so important to me because I did believe that if I sat there, the creative impulse would arrive. So.
Amazing. Yeah. This is wonderful. It was so enlightened conversation. And I'm so happy to have joined all of you. So I believe we can proceed to the next step. Is that correct? So time comes to the presentation of the award. The RBC Emerging Playwright Award is generously sponsored by the RBC Emerging Artist Fund. PGC would like to thank Muriel Hogue, Varuna Steshwilo and Yuan Wallace for taking part in RBC Emerging Playwright Award jury. It's my pleasure to announce the shortlist nominees. The nominees are Makram Ayesh for Harun, Megs Kaleya for 20-something, and Gabe Maharjan for Eva in Rio. This is wonderful. Gabe's play Eva in Rio was actually first stage read by my company a couple of years ago. Oh, so that said, the second runner-up therefore is Gabe Maharjan for Eva in Rio. The first runner-up is Meg Kaleya for 20-something, and our 2020 RBC Emerging Playwright Award goes to Makram Ayesh for Harun. Makram, congratulations.
Thank you to the Playwrights Guild of Canada and to the jury for this recognition. I'd like to congratulate my co-nominees and everyone who made it to the finalists. Much of this play was written in Amiskwaciwâskagan, colonially called Edmonton. So I want to thank the original caretakers of this land that allow me to be here in a meaningful way, in a meaningful relationship here. The Dene, Cree, Blackfoot, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and the Inuit, and those that are recorded and unrecorded, named and unnamed. This is their land. We're engaged in Treaty 6 here in Edmonton, where I'm speaking from. There are several people that I need to thank: Kim McCaw, Alex Donovan, Miyako Uchi, Jacob, Sarah, Hillary, Griffin, Amina, Jessica, Reza, Karu, Chris, Sky, Charles, Neto, Leela Ray Crofton, Sarita Lopez, Mark, Hala Nasser, Roxanne Cote, Connor, Kelsey, and Alyssa Bartlett. I have to thank the Alberta Foundation for the Arts and the Edmonton Fringe Festival and the Ignite Festival in Calgary. Thank you. And thank you, Buddies, for supporting a reading of it last year. This play also none of my work can ever be possible without my parents, my family, who won't even get to see this video because they don't know the content of my work. And so what I hope is that what I get to do today, maybe tomorrow there will be people that come from similar experiences as me that don't have to have this disconnect between parents, family, and our real lives. I want to give a lot of gratitude and thanks to all the brown queer heroes that have paved the way. The story of Haroon is a queer, brown reckoning with coming out, with losing identity and relationship between family. It's obviously coming from a very autobiographical place, but it's become its own thing and its own energy and entity. And so much of it, even though it originated in a very painful experience for me, has become a tremendously healing experience. For it to land in meaningful ways with the jury, with the independent productions that we've produced in the few previous years, this play has been a real encouragement, and this award really contributes to that encouragement and affirmation. In the beginning of the play, there's an explosion that takes place in Beirut, and well, if you know anything about what's happening recently, an explosion actually did happen in Beirut, and a lot of people have been displaced, and the queer communities have been disproportionately impacted. So I want to give a specific shout out to Proud Lebanon. If you have any way of supporting them, donating, amplifying Proud Lebanon, you could find them on Facebook. There's also a tremendous activist and newcomer, Jad Jabir, who's doing queer migrant workshops and organizing academics and activists from the Global South that are based in Canada, in Toronto right now. If you could give love, attention, energy, money towards Jad, that's a huge extension of my work. So if you want to direct some energy and love towards those people and groups, that'd be great. I'm excited to see where these conversations continue to go and grow. So thank you so much.
It's amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for tuning in this evening. Congratulations to everyone who submitted to the RBC Emerging Playwright Award. It was a record-breaking year this year. In this one category, there was over 70 submissions. So it's incredible to see how many people are writing, and thank you for submitting and keep writing. Just a reminder that our awards go all week. You can go to www.playwrightsguild.ca/awards for all of the streaming links there. So I hope that you will join us and you will celebrate our community all together as we continue on through 2020. So thank you so much to Hiro and Catherine and Anne-Marie and Raul. Thank you so much for your time and for being here today. And thank you to all of you who came and hung out and listened and hopefully got some great advice. So thank you so much.